Okay, so now on to our final panel of the day on an extremely important topic, inclusivity in the restaurant industry. Today's moderator is Ashley Christensen, chef and owner of Pools Diner, Beasley Chicken and Honey, Fox Liquor Bar, Death and Taxes, Bridge Club, and Poolside Pies, all located in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. Ashley's cooking, hinged on her philosophy of bright, fresh flavors and locally grown seasonal ingredients, has garnered local and national acclaim. Ashley is involved in a number of charities, including the Frankie Lemon Foundation, Southern Foodways Alliance, and Share Our Strength. In 2019, she received her second James Beard Award for the category of Outstanding Chef, 5 years after the foundation first honored her with the award for Best Chef Southeast in 2014. She has also been named Chef of the Year by Eater.com and Tar Heel of the Year by the News and Observer. In the spring of yeah, that is a great one. That's why I was like, oh, that's cool. In the spring of 2021, Ashley received her honorary doctorate of humane letters from North Carolina State University. She's the author of 2 cookbooks, Pools, Recipes, and Stories from a Modern Diner, 2016, and It's Always Freezer Season, 2021. So it is my pleasure to turn the mic over to Chef to introduce our panel and esteemed panelists.
Okay, thank you so much. As panelists, we know you have a lot of panels to choose from, and we want to thank you for choosing this panel at 3:15 today. It is my great honor to make these introductions. To my left, Kelly Fields is a chef and cookbook author who in 2019 was named James Beard Foundation's Outstanding Pastry Chef, while at the helm at her former restaurant, Willa Jean. She has also been named one of Garden & Gun's most influential women in the South, one of Southern Living's 5 best kitchen magicians. Now that's fun. In the South, and by... that was fun, wasn't it? And by Reader's Choice Awards and Dessert Professional as one of the top 10 pastry chefs in North America. Kelly's first cookbook, The Good Book of Southern Baking, was named one of the best cookbooks of the year by the New York Times Book Review, Bon Appetit, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Garden & Gun, and the LA Times. In her spare time, Fields enjoys traveling, reading, photography, fishing, and gardening. Her dogs, Kenny and Ruthie, are always by her side, except for right now, unfortunately. And she can be found documenting their adventures and crimes on Instagram. Gregory Gourdet is the chef and founder of Khan and Sosul in Portland, Oregon, and the James Beard Foundation award-winning author of Everyone's Table: Global Recipes for Modern Health. Gourdet honed his culinary skills at 3 of Jean-Georges Vongreschan's trailblazing restaurants in New York City, and was executive chef and culinary director at Portland's Departure Restaurant and Lounge for 10 years. In August of 2022, Gourdet opened the highly anticipated Khan, a live fire dinner house that showcases traditional Haitian cuisine. A month later, he opened Sosul, the subterranean pan-Caribbean cocktail bar located below Khan. The restaurant has been recognized as one of the best new restaurants of 2022 by Eater, Esquire, the New York Times, Portland Monthly, and the Oregonian. Most recently, Khan was named Best New Restaurant finalist in the 2023 James Beard Foundation Awards. He spends his spare time running in the woods for hours, it says. Manish Goyal, to my right, is a passionate serial entrepreneur, most recently adding restaurateur to his list of titles after opening the modern Indian restaurant Sona and reopening New York's iconic Temple Bar. Just this past June, Manish broadened his business portfolio even further by co-founding new homeware collection Sona Home with partner Priyanka Chopra Jonas. Through his work with Pineapple Co., his entrepreneurial umbrella, Manish is an active angel investor and advisor working with a handful of startups and mid-sized company. He sits on the board and executive committee of New York City Tourism and Conventions, a longtime advocate. He also proudly served on the national board of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America for the past 5 years. We all thank you for that. Manish lives in New York City with his husband and son. He is a big believer that risk makes life remarkable. Last but not least is Silver Icavosi. Silver is a child of a Filipino immigrant born in South Carolina and raised in the cross-section of the American South in the Philippines. As a lifelong Southerner, Silver continues to nurture a deep love for the histories and foodways of live fire cooking and its application globally. Dedication to the culinary cosmos is indebted to the experience of their Filipino mother, Nanang, as a first-generation immigrant landing on Parris Island, South Carolina in 1986. As the first-time chef owner of the highly acclaimed, community-funded restaurant Nang Junior's, Silver keeps hearts and minds full in Nashville, North Carolina. The restaurant has been featured in Bon Appetit and named a Best New Restaurant by Eater and Esquire, where Silver was also named Rising Star Chef. Nang Junior's is also a 2023 James Beard finalist for Best New Restaurant. I know these are long introductions, but like to me, that was all like really important stuff. And if I'm in the room with these folks, I want to know that about them. So yes. So first, we've had the chance to banter back and forth a little bit and talk about things that we want to share with you today. The first question that I have for everyone, I'm going to ask everyone to answer, is how you identify. And to me, how I identify highlights things that I acknowledge about myself. And in some cases, perhaps things that I didn't always highlight as a measure of making my audience as comfortable as possible. Over time, I came to realize that as a leader, how I identify helps to normalize conversations around previously overlooked or avoided very important conversations. For example, my name is Ashley Christensen. I am a gay woman and a hospitality-focused business owner, chef, and employer of many badasses. My pronouns are she and her. And really, something I want to share, like until starting this conversation, I had not thought about the fact that something else that now is important for me to share is that I'm an alcoholic. And I say this because I think that, it's important for me to say that so that it's clear that, since I have learned that I have no shame around this, that by identifying this part of myself, I create space for others to do the same. So I'll ask us to start with you, Gregory.
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Greg Gourdet. I am a gay male. I'm a restaurateur, author. I'm also a drug addict and an alcoholic that's happily and gratefully in recovery. And my pronouns are he, him.
Thank you. Manish Goyal, a queer man who is the son of immigrants from India, grew up in Texas and has found a home in New York. And my father, I think my identity was born. My father took a big risk, like a lot of immigrants do, and he opened the first Indian restaurant in the state of Texas in 1975, an Indian restaurant that he opened 2 months after I was born while he had a full-time job. I'm the youngest of three. So I have always identified with that immigrant experience, although I was born in Texas. And I am also really now identify as being a brand new parent. My husband and I adopted a 1-year-old boy. It's been less than a year, since we've known him, but now I'm a new parent.
My name is Kelly Fields. I identify as a non-binary weirdo. Just kind of who I've become. My pronouns, I have a relationship with them that I go by all of them. I wear them all loosely and just don't have a lot of care for that for myself.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Hi, I am Silver Ekavozi. Thank you for having me here. This is my first time speaking on a panel, so I feel really happy to be with everyone. I've been having this thought recently where I don't want to box myself into too many identifiers, but I do really feel proud to say that these identifiers for myself today. I am openly transgender. I am the chef and owner of Nang Junior's. It's the first Filipino restaurant in Asheville. I am a native Southerner and a second-generation Filipino. My pronouns are he and they.
Thank you. My first question for the panel, and this is one that I would love for everyone to answer, and it's broad, and it's not easy to hone this down, but I think what's important are the four perspectives that sit on the stage in the panel with us today. So, Manish, I'm going to start with you. What defines inclusiveness in the restaurant industry to you?
So, as you mentioned, I'm brand new to the industry. I opened my first restaurant 2 years ago, and so I made a big pivot and really wanted to honor my family and my upbringing and do. I didn't want to open a restaurant. I wanted to open an Indian restaurant. I was very deliberate about that. And it's been, I come from it. I previously worked in the marketing industry, which candidly felt very warm and welcoming, because honestly, it was a bunch of girls and gays. And I felt this kinship immediately as I spent 15 years in that industry and had a business. Inclusivity in the restaurant industry has been much harder to find. And it's something that is, as I sought out inclusivity, it was harder to identify. And so it's become a real pillar of mine to create it in my own restaurant. And it has been hard fought and something I'm still working towards, but it is something that is core to how I walk into the restaurant every day.
Gregory?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, inclusivity in the restaurant industry truly means creating spaces that truly represent the spectrum of folks of color, the spectrum of people's genders, the spectrum of people's age, and the spectrum of just people's just creativity. And I think coming out of the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and like everything that happened in the reckoning and being able to open a restaurant like on the heels of that, it really blew the doors on what we specifically wanted our restaurant to be. And I gave myself the grace and the time to really focus on those ideals and really build a staff that surrounded those ideals. And every day we work really, really hard to make sure that everyone feels good. And now between the restaurant and the bar, we have a staff of about 60 folks. I will say that like our restaurant is 80% women. We have a very diverse staff. I live in Portland, Oregon. It's one of the whitest cities in America. We're not in the top 10 anymore, but we're still up there. Just being able to tell a story of culture, because I think that that's something that's important as well, and being inclusive of that story of culture, and importing Haitian ingredients and telling the story of Haiti to every single guest that walks through that door. And for me, like having that whole thing, that is what inclusivity means to me.
Silver, in our conversation, you talked a little bit about the practice of being thoughtful and intentional and the importance of that. Can you speak to that?
Yes. I feel like inclusivity can feel like a scary word to a lot of people. But I think for us to be able to digest it more easily, we can think of it as more thoughtful and in consideration. In consideration is something I say to my staff a lot when I want them to be more mindful of the practices that we choose, whether that's just the space that we take up in the kitchen and cleaning up after ourselves. I think also as chefs and leaders, we're always looking for guidance. And there were times in the beginning of opening Neng's where I was really looking for so much guidance to the point of needing to pull a tarot card. And one day I pulled out the King of Cups. And there's this line that really also encapsulates fully what inclusivity really means. And it is it is judicious, dimensional, and expansive. And it's the difference between emotional intelligence and head intelligence. So you can balance out the difference of understanding yourself, but also understanding whatever someone's need is that they're communicating is a real need and a need to be in consideration.
Love that.
I don't want to follow that. Just to piggyback on what everybody said, because I think it's the summary for all of us and what we think, how we approach this. Like for me, it's just creating a space where people can show up as exactly who they are and thrive and have equal access to any opportunity that presents itself, whether that's our team members or the guest. Everybody can just show up and be loudly themselves.
And coming up in this industry, and I know that we've all had experiences, varying experiences. I'm wondering where you've noticed firsthand a lack of inclusivity. And Kelly, since you just started talking, I feel like I cut you off with this question. So why don't you pick up for us?
Cut me off right now if you want. Where have I noted? What's the question?
Sure, sure. Just from your firsthand experience, where have you noticed a lack?
I mean, growing up and
Inclusivity. It
yeah.
doesn't have to be,
being
specific place, but the idea of
somebody
that
assigned birth, working in the South in a kitchen, as usually the only person that was assigned female at birth in that kitchen, and working for rich white men, let's be honest, who I was expected to be and who people around me were expected to be, like put us in little tiny boxes. So much that I saw myself and the people around me literally get physically ill from the anxiety, from the pressure of being somebody you're not, from even the way we were able to show up in spaces like this and what we were expected to say, what hands we're supposed to shake, like all of the bullshit. And that doesn't allow anyone, including myself, to show up and like cook the way we need to cook from the heart, like love what we do, when fitting in this box to not get fired because you cut your hair is the only thing you can think about in the front of your mind. That's my experience.
Gregory?
I mean, there's a lot, I mean, I've been in places where people have like not be able to like have their hair dyed a certain color. I've worked in places where the women had to wear skirts and dresses, and that was the only uniform if you were a female. I've also been in spaces where, people have been criticized for their mental health. So, I think as we move past that kind of realm of working in a restaurant and like that defining what restaurants are, I think taking the time to just really dive into I think as leaders now, we have a very broad responsibility in terms of taking care of our people, and making sure acceptance is a huge part of it, and just really trying to understand where everyone comes from, and we meet them halfway. And really trying to be that place where, like you have to loosen up about certain things, and we have to be there to support our teams, and we have to see ourselves as leaders. I think one of the biggest things I learned throughout the pandemic is I personally feel like I have everything I have and like all the tribulations that I've gone through to get to my place to where I'm at in my career. And I just want to give back. And that truly means like accepting all my employees where they are, and making sure that they feel good about work every single day, and making sure that, the leaders around me, the other managers, we're all on the same page about what's happening.
Absolutely. Manish, as a newcomer to the industry, what's been most surprising?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've really been searching for community and searching for, in some ways, role models. I mean, and I have huge respect for the restaurant industry for a long time. I'm new to it, but my restaurant happens to be right next door to a juggernaut of a New York restaurant. But my story and we're friendly because we're neighbors, but my story and Danny Meyer's story are never going to be the same. They're never going to be the same. And so it's just hard. And I can look to, Steven Starr came into our restaurant the other day. I was like, and he came in and people said, I was like, oh, I was very flattered that he came in. They're like, oh, well, he might be coming in to steal your ideas or your staff. And so I said, okay, noted. I didn't realize that. But I was like, but my journey and his journey are never going to be the same. Like they're just not. Like I'm a gay dude from Texas and I'm very like queer positive. So we have a lot of queer staff, and like I couldn't wait to the second that we could bring our son home. The first thing I wanted to do was bring him to the restaurant. And this was this young boy who was entering into my family forevermore, and I wanted him to come to this restaurant. So I've had a hard time finding community. In fact, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of New York City Tourism. And I said, I want to do something for queer food during queer restaurants, queer chefs during Pride. And so we're talking to the team at NYC and Company, and they're like, wait, who's going to make this list? I was like, we'll find the list. Like, there's got to, like, we're in New York City, and like, we've got to find a list of these, like, and so I think for a place that has employed a lot of people of different identities, the decision makers haven't always been of the kind that we're now hopefully starting to see. And I think that's, so I long for community, and that's what I've had the hardest time finding.
And I think that's one of the brilliant things about a conference like this and a gathering like this is, there are so many questions about how to do this like the right way. And it's easy to go like, hey, I care about my staff. I'm a nice person. I can get there with you. We can talk about things. But as a leader, you really have to go above and beyond, and you have to be having a lot of conversations that don't shift your perception. They enrich your perception and give you experiences through the eyes and restaurants of others and hearts of others. And so it is really amazing to be here. And, there have been so many conversations, so many topics that all tie in and weave in together. And I love that. But then the idea of mentorship, I think like I've always thought of mentorship as like the community of restaurant owners who you develop these conversations with, and the ability just to call each other and learn from each other, but also the resource of our teams. And, I'm 46 years old. A lot of our team members are a lot younger than I am, and they're coming at the world in a different way. And so the best place that I can learn about how they're looking at it is from them, for sure. Silver, speak to this.
So I realized when I was going as a cisgender person in kitchens and being referred to as a badass woman chef, I never really wanted that nickname, and I was trying to realize why it caused me discomfort. And then I realized that I was transgender, and I stepped away from the industry so I could allow myself to transition. In that transition, it gives me the ability to afford myself to be a great boss, because I can pay attention to myself so much so that I can love myself. There's actually this church that Cherry's my husband, who's sitting in the front row over here. We drive by this church, and the marquee right now says, "I love you begins with I and ends with you." And I believe the care and attention that you give yourself will translate into the care that you give to your business. Transness has a history and lineage as deep as every ethnicity, if not longer. There is a mythological character in Filipino history called Lakpati, and she's the trans goddess of agriculture and an inspiration for my restaurant, and I feel guided by her. I think there is this like thing that a lot of people say and ask me in a very dismissive way about why they need to know that I'm trans, and it's just for the simple fact of visibility. I can be a representation for someone, maybe not someone in this room, but someone that can see me from afar and see that they can be in my shoes and be trans and be a chef. With this, like also just like another curious thing I was thinking about, maybe somebody in this room can answer this for me, but when we got this James Beard nomination, which was so exciting, I wondered if any trans chef has ever won a James Beard, but I'm not sure. And that's just a curious thing of history, and it's worth being represented. And there is a conversation between Damar and Eric. And Damar had met Eric for the first time and saw a black chef in a white chef coat with his name Eric Williams on the coat, and said that he could see himself and see the future for himself. And that is why I say what I say and why I'm in this seat today. So,
thank you. Gregory, one of the things we touched on was this concept of fitting in. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Sorry. Yeah. Fitting in. I share the same story. Immigrant parents. I think we're about the same age. Yeah. So, my father grew up in Lazille, which is a little town in southern Haiti with no running water or electricity. My mom grew up in the capital. I grew up in New York City in the 80s and 90s, and we couldn't be any completely different. I grew up during the rave era. They've never done drugs in their life. So we were like completely on different paths. But my parents always like pushed education, looking the part. They have heavy accents, so they had to work really, really hard. They worked in diverse spaces. It was New York City, mostly white spaces and hospitals, but still diverse spaces. And it was very much, clean haircut, tuck your shirt in, go to church. So I always had this concept of having to fit in. And I never really quite fit in, but like I played the part. I wasn't the loudest kid. So, like as a cis male working in fine dining restaurants, throughout New York City, I did fit in, and I did the job, and I had my head down, and I paid attention to my mentors, and it got me really far. I think the thing, and I think a lot of what I did, kind of in my earlier parts of my career, kind of like let certain things happen. So like all the guys who saw me as a mentor, who talked to my tails. I felt like sometimes I paid more attention to them besides the kind of outliers, the more quiet folks. And I ran like high volume restaurant for like a long time. We had like 30 cooks. So I think when we think about this concept of fitting in and like who fits in at the restaurant, I think as leaders, again, I think it always comes back to us. You have to have a really broad spectrum of like who fits in, because the quiet person who needs to be lifted up, who needs a little more encouragement, you have to make sure that they're okay. I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of transgendered cooks, and we have to be super aware of like the sensitivities around that, and like we just have to create spaces where people can feel comfortable, because it's oftentimes it's very challenging to be a Black woman in this field. It's challenging to be gay in this field. It's challenging to be trans in this field, and like I've seen it firsthand from coworkers and colleagues and people on our teams. So when we think about fitting in, we have to create spaces where everyone feels comfortable that they do fit in and they're not the outlier in the kitchen. And I think that's a huge focus of ours now, and just being able to have these conversations with all these different folks and be like, hey, you are a bartender, and you are a Black woman, and I know like you've come up with Portland bars, and like you've come up with a lot of white male bartenders. So we need to think about things differently in how you move through our space. And that happens with every different type of person.
I'm seeing the Q&A flyer, but give me just a second. This I feel like connects to what you started with about being, criticized for
absolutely.
things that make you you.
Mm-hmm.
Silver, you touched on this a little bit too, and it's just like we're all talking about like the hiring crisis and how to make our places that people want to be and enjoy working, and not just make jobs, but make careers. And of course, if you go into a place and you're terrified to be who you are, how do you roll your shoulders back and like do the best work and find a way to connect with it in a lifelong way? It's like flooring that anyone is made to feel that way, or that anyone would care to make someone feel that way. But so thank you all for sharing on that. I want to ask, you're a consultant, and so you go into an environment and you look at what's going on. You of course are adding these beautiful gifts of your amazing pastry talent, but it's more than that. And so I want to ask, in those environments, is there an opportunity there where you get to push this conversation a little bit further?
Absolutely. This conversation starts at the very beginning of somebody reaching out for me to maybe work with them. And I have the privilege to choose to work with people who support this, who want to further this. I'm doing a consulting project right now for two guys that just got married who they bought a brewery and they want to up their food game. And their entire goal in our first conversation was, how do we source and like make it almost like that we're just supporting other queer food makers or farmers, all this regional stuff. So my job for them is to only like bring in queer stuff. And like, that's a dream. Like, come on. Like the people I've met, the food I've been able to eat, and just sort of be able to support people who are furthering this conversation. Because I think it's also important to say that this conversation isn't just about restaurant ownership in your space. Like, to understand why it's important for you to be visible, why it's important to listen to your staff, which everybody has talked about during this conference, is there's an absolute attack on our community. And people like you choose to show up every day as your genuine self. And us as restaurant owners or people need to recognize the beauty in that person, of how they show up and continue to show up despite the attack, despite not being able to walk in a bathroom without the fear of becoming a federal sexual predator on a listing. just for washing your hands. It's also about y'all, because a lot of the legislation that's going on, a lot of the things that are being passed, even the Affordable Care Act, preventative measures that were struck down by the Fifth Circuit last week, they pinned it on gay and like queers and gay, and that it's about PrEP. It's about preventative care. So that affects everybody in this room. That's diabetes, that's cancer screenings, that's everything you can think about. And it takes away from all of us. And it's more, to me, about how to be a citizen and support the people and community around you, which is the restaurant you create and the people you choose to hire. Like, this conversation is so much bigger than 1 hour in this room.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all have been. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And we talk about.
Sorry, I get nervous. My
No,
voice
that's
cracks.
you're wonderful. I think someone said in one of the panels earlier about how folks we vote with our we vote with our dollars and how we go in and support different people. And I love that you just shared, like, in a time where everyone's trying to figure out how to earn, that you're talking to a potential client and saying, I'm not going to take your money.
Yeah. If you're queer and you make food in this room, talk to me.
At this time, we will ask folks to raise their hands for questions. And I would ask you, we've got a large room, and I know we have a microphone that you guys would like to deliver. In the back, raising hand on the left, to the left a little bit further, and we'll come back to you. I'm told it's required.
Hi. When you think of communal spaces for queer people, it's always in the industry, it's always surrounding a bar or a club, and you rarely hear it surrounding a restaurant. I think the only example I can think of is Florence in New York that unfortunately closed.
Yes.
We missed
That
that.
is an amazing inspiration for what I do. Just saying.
And
Sorry.
I'm very sad that I'm too young to experience that as a era. But anyway, do you see a future in communal spaces being surrounding restaurants instead of like a bar or a club or anything that's just serving beverages? Or no offense to bars, but like, do you see a future in that?
Yeah, I certainly do. And the space has to be created. So, I mean, a perfect example is, so as I stepped into this, I said, how can I be as welcoming, and how can we create a queer friendly space, an inclusive space? So it starts with our hiring. I'm a big believer in core values and everyone knowing our core values, because I come from the agency world, as I said. And so one of our core values that is everybody knows is bring your funky self. So everybody who works at Sona is meant, we ask them to bring, if you're anything less than your funky self, then you're not going to do a great job, because you're hiding a part. You're spending too much time thinking, oh no, this funk might come out, and let the funk flare, but also do your job. But so we've had team members who said, oh my God, I could have never worked in another restaurant. I could only work here. And so consequently, I then, I love partnering with brands, because I think it actually is a great way to amplify. And so I said, around Valentine's Day, I want to throw an amazing Love is Love queer party at Sona. And it was because, so we did this, that I partnered with MasterCard, and I got some other brands on board, and we had 250 people in our restaurant that didn't hold 250 people, and it was just amazing. And consequently, we've booked 3 wedding events from all gay weddings. And so because they read about it, they saw it, so they knew that this is going to be a place where they're going to feel welcomed, they're going to want. So you kind of start to create. We now host a drag brunch with a South Asian drag queen, and it's so fun because I have I'm not doing a drag brunch because it's a way to get more covers. I'm doing a drag brunch because I want my son to come and hang out at drag brunch every other Saturday. So, and also it's a fun, so you have to create these spaces, create opportunity, create welcome. And I do think the idea, because I am old enough, and it's very sweet that we're the same age. I'm a year away from 50, and so I don't like to say that my real age. I'm getting ready to say 50, so I went to Florent, and it was amazing. And these spaces, I had my coming out in New York, and it's a character in my story. And I want this restaurant to be a part of that. And And why not an Indian restaurant, right? I mean, that's the thing, because this is a new world in which we're living, and so anything goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think just as kind of Silver mentioned, just like being visible is extremely important. And I'm very intersectional. I'm a gay Black man. I'm an addict and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a son of immigrants. So whenever I see people from any of those communities come into the restaurant, like I'm hyper focused, because like I know that they have come into our restaurant because they see someone like me, which relates to a part of them, and I really want to make sure that they have a great experience. And like honestly, we have the chef's counter. It's like a running joke. Me and like all my other queer cooks, like sometimes it's just the straights at the 13 seats at the chef's counter, and then we'll laugh about that, like just like straight date night, and then it'll be just like all queer date night, and like it'll be every gender spectrum, and like like I make sure that those folks have a really great time. I want to make sure they feel welcome. The Haitian immigrants, I want to make sure they feel welcome, like all those people, and like it's extremely important. The people in wheelchairs, I want to make sure they feel welcome. So like that inclusivity, it's really about being that place where like all walks of life truly feel comfortable, and like you don't fuss over them, but you just make them feel like they're a regular guest. And like maybe you do fuss over them because some of them, they're coming in and they have a raised eyebrow, like like they're not used to being in certain spaces, or they might not feel super comfortable in these spaces. Like I know a lot of my Haitian guests, like they see a lot of white servers, and even our folks of color are some are light skinned. They just happen to be. So like I want to make sure they feel very, very comfortable. And I feel queer couples, like they've often been like mistreated in spaces, and we want to make sure that they feel really, really good when they come to our spaces.
We are preparing to reopen our bar, and we closed it at the beginning of the pandemic. But truthfully, we were never really great at running a bar because we're restaurant people and we're, not late night bar folks. And as we reopen, a lot of new perspectives, lots of zero proof cocktails, earlier hours, closing earlier, being open during the day, and like the longing for that communal space that can be there beyond the perspective of after 10 p.m. And I definitely had a lot of, back in the day, late night cocktails and wolf eats at Florent. So, yes, thank you.
So, Kelly, you said something earlier that just in passing that I thought was really striking, which was that there was a time when, you were so sort of fixated on whether you could cut your hair that you weren't even thinking about the food. Right. I think what feels really remarkable about this panel is that everyone who's up here feels really rooted in their truth, and has actually been able to find the resources in the space to like literally create that space. You have your own restaurants. And so the question here is, do you cook differently now? Like, do you feel like your relationship with food has shifted, or the way that you cook and you think about the menus that you're building when you're like so rooted in these spaces that you've created effectively for yourselves and for your team?
I mean, full disclosure, I got to live my full self because I quit cooking and stepped away from the restaurant, stepped away from New Orleans. I landed in P-Town, Massachusetts, where every space is a gay space. Everybody's welcome. The straights are the real like, ooh, wow, did you see that? When they walk down the street, because it's so uncommon, which has allowed me to like fully, be 44 and learn how to like myself finally. So I have, in the past year, started getting back in food and falling in love with it in a whole new way. So yeah, it's changed a lot. And like, I'm at a point where if I don't love it, if it's not something that benefits me or the people around me, I just don't need to do it anymore.
I am so here for you liking yourself.
Thank you.
I like you a lot.
It took me a minute, but I caught up, guys.
I would like to just off the tail of that question that Elazar just asked, that one thing with my menu and with the confidence of my authenticity, my menu, if you've been to my restaurant, is extremely brief and vague and requires a description from our servers. And I think that just exuberates all the confidence of what I'm serving you, and also how much I believe and every member of our team that's part of Nang Juniors, and I definitely recommend experiencing it. And also, you earlier asking about places besides bars, like Nang Juniors is the place for sure to go to experience that level of service. That's all.
And you can come to P-Town anytime.
Okay.
So I guess I was handed the microphone at the perfect time as I see the sign come up. This isn't as much as a question.
I was just gonna say, I think the sign before it said 5, and I was like, if I act like I just saw that 10 minutes from now, but now it's like a fresh handwritten end. Sorry, go ahead.
Seeing as this is not as much a question, but as a thank you, I graduate not next week, but the week after. Thank you for the one person that as someone that identifies outside the box, but finds it really hard to live outside the box. It's really awesome. Oh my God.
That's okay. Yeah, let it out. We've got all the time. You catch your breath, and we're here for this.
I've been thinking about saying this as you guys sat down, and I told myself I wasn't going to do that. But like you said, visibility, it's incredible to see you guys sit up there, and I'm really glad that you choose to and that you are able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. It's incredible that you stood up and shared that.
Yep.
Thank you. That means a lot.
And congratulations on graduating.
Yes. Okay, so at this time, we will prepare to end. Just a huge thank you to our panelists sitting here with us. All the panelists who have and moderators who have spoken and shared over the last 2 days. I also want to say that as chefs, it's so nice to go to work on an airplane where you don't have to pack your knives, your aprons, or your coolers. So I'd like to have a huge round of applause for all the people that did and cooked for us this weekend.